Hi there, it's Kevin with RogueDeckBuilder.com with this week's episode of the Market Monday. So for this week, I'm just going to do what I did last week and run down the spoilers from today and a couple days ago for the core set 2020 and kind of give you the argument that Wizards has been ramping up the power level of casual and commander cards with these past few sets, and core 2020 is no different. So I'm expecting the set to sell very well for a core set. The lands, usually I look at a set and judge it based upon its lands to see if it has any sort of what we'd call staying power or the ability for this set to be sold long term for people trying to get those specific lands. And core 2020 absolutely does not have that going for it. In fact, it's one of the worst land cycles they could have chosen with the Scry lands. Now, there are a few personalities that have been talking how they want these to be evergreen, or they think they're the perfect lands because they are a dual land with an upside that does have also a huge downside of always coming to play tapped. So they really affect the way that standard decks are built. They slow down the standard meta without having lands that automatically they're coming to play untapped or have a high upside of coming to play untapped, and that is good for standard. However, these aren't very highly sought after in the any other, like even in Commander. A lot of the times the Scry lands are, if you're really tuning your Commander decks, you don't want them. And Modern as well, there's only a few decks that do run these Scry lands. So anyway, without getting too much into it, I don't think that Core 2020 has any sort of attraction with the lands, which is usually bad for a set selling long term. However, as I previously stated, they have been ramping up the power level of casual cards. Usually these types of abilities were on creatures that were just either weaker, had a higher converted mana cost, or didn't quite do as much. Had some sort of drawback, some sort of other clause that made them not as good as they could be. And with these particular abilities, we'll go over them in a second, they have usually, in Core 2020, or even I'd even say Dominary Forward, are usually attached to either big bodies, have very reasonable abilities without the drawbacks we saw before, or even reasonable mana cost. So it'd be like an enchantment that with the exact same mana cost would be thrown on a creature this time around. So anyway, without further ado, let's jump right into the spoilers. Let's start with one of those cards. This is Glinthorn Buccaneer. This is a 3-mana haste for a 2/4 Minotaur. So right there, that is almost good enough. A 2/4 body, 3-mana haste, and then they've attached the ability of whenever you discard a card, the Buccaneer deals 1 damage to each opponent, and then has the ability, on top of that, to then discard a card to draw a card, and can only be activated when it is attacking. So again, in Standard, in Constructed, this probably isn't a card that is going to see many decks, if any at all. It does dodge the Lightning Strike, so maybe that's the good upside to it right now. It dodges all the 3 damage spells. However, in a deck like Commander, or even if you build around a very, very focused discard deck, say even look at Hollow One in Modern with like Burning Inquiries and Faithless Lootings, this sort of card does seem to have the good curve going for it, that it's a 2/4 for 3 mana with haste, so the upside there. But the ability is also having the double ability, pushes it over the top for casual play. So I think that most of the discard-based decks in, of course, Commander that runs off of, there's a couple of black-red discard decks that have been built before. I think there's a pre-constructed deck that worked off discarding cards, or your opponent's discarding cards, or you discarding cards. This, of course, is going to go in those particular decks. You have a lot of wheel effects in Commander. And then on top of that, it's got that nice 2/4 body. So I think this card will be sought after and will be put in many of those decks. Discard seems to be a theme of this set. We have Bag of Holding. I actually like this card a lot because in certain decks, it's a good 1-drop and something to do on your turn 2 to draw a card and to discard a card. This card actually feels very similar to Azor's Gateway to me. Of course, it doesn't flip into a huge mana-producing card. However, with 4 and tap and sacrificing it, you can get back all the cards you discarded with Bag of Holding. So often it might be lands that you've put, but you can actually set this up. So instead of discarding the lands with your typical loot, you can then discard the non-lands, the cards you want to cast later on, and then hit those land drops. And as soon as you have 4 and enough cards underneath Bag of Holding, and any other cards that get exiled with Bag of Holding, then you can crack it and then get all of those cards back. So again, it has that synergy with the other discard cards, as this card does exile them, and then you then get to get them back eventually with the low cost of just 4 and tapping this artifact, or sacrificing this artifact. So then we have a filler card with Scampering Scorcher. We've seen this before in other. It's a pretty good card for limited, creating 3 elementals for 4 mana. And the elementals, elementals also gain haste until end of turn. So pretty good in the elemental tribal. I'm assuming it's going to be quite potent, especially Temur elementals in the draft format. We'll skip over this one for the market aspect of it. All right, then we have the Drakaseth Maw of Flames, 7 mana, 7/7, and whenever the Drakaseth Maw of Flames attacks, deals 4 damage to any target, 3 damage to each of up to 2 other targets. So what I like about this card right now is it does go into Kaalia already. Kaalia likes cards that... Oh, no, it does miss Kaalia. Never mind. So it actually will come into play attacking, and therefore it misses that attack trigger. Yeah, so I guess Kaalia likes to enter the battlefield or deals damage abilities. So never mind. This is a drawback for Kaalia. It probably still will go in Kaalia decks. That's starting to get, at this point though, Kaalia decks are starting to get very, very tuned, where I don't know if this can compete with the other ones. However, this does seem very interesting there is a reanimation spell that gives it haste right now in Core 2020. There are a few other reanimation spells throughout the standard at the moment, and the problem is there haven't been some good reanimator targets that get immediate abilities. Not very good enter the battlefield effects, arguably. This one does seem to have a pretty decent enter the battlefield, or at least get immediate value if you can give it haste. We do have the ability to ramp into it with the Sarkon from Core 2019 that will be legal with this card. But beyond that, I don't see any huge upsides to this card besides being able to cheat it out in some way and hopefully kill 3 creatures when it attacks in for the first time. All right, let's go on to Apostle of Purifying Light, which is protection from black and exile target card from a graveyard. So this is going to be Standard's best way of trying to get rid of able to recur cards. I think this will see sideboard plays right now. One of the hardest decks for mono white to deal with is the Command the Dreadhorde with the either Wild Growth Walker or the Bant Ramp, or 4-color ramp, I guess is what it's into now. With Command the Dreadhorde now being able to get back a bunch of things that either gain life when they have come into play, or can gain life through cards like Lifelink and Sorin, and then Command the Dreadhorde can get them all back. Apostle of Purifying Light can at least eat those key cards. So this will be nice for Standard to have almost a Scavenging Ooze type effect. It also does have protection from black, so keep that in mind if you're going up. It's a black deck with the removal. So in this Command the Dreadhorde, that usually is going to be their removal spell, whether it be Vraska or I guess it doesn't get around the negative X effect, or -4 that the Fine Finality does. However, it does get around like Cast Down and things like that. God's Willing is back in Standard. This is going to be good for a pseudo-heroic based strategy. There are a couple of cards that deal with being targeted, and of course Feather decks and other Boros based decks seem to have red decks, well I guess Boros decks in that regards, have a lot of casting instance. So this is a good one that protects your threat and also gets that cast trigger plus a scry. Last time it saw Standard, or last time it was in Standard, it did see Standard play, so it might be worthwhile to take a look at all those feather-based decks that are going around and see if God's Willing is enough to push that archetype into existence. If I remember correctly, I don't think a lot of things rotate. I know there was a couple key cards from Ixalan, like the 4 damage to target creature and 2 damage to a creature you control, that when your Boros cards were mainly 2/3s, it was basically just a free trigger off of whatever card by casting a spell or getting a heroic trigger and killing a card, or feather, you get it back. However, that's going to hurt for that one to rotate. But God's Willing is a good reprint for that particular archetype. All right, then we're on to the Thunderkin Awakener, a 2 mana for a 1/2. When it attacks, you choose an elemental creature card in your graveyard with toughness less than the Awakener's toughness. Return that card to the battlefield tapped and attacking, and sacrifice the beginning of next end step. What's kind of cool about this is there's a way to pump up your elemental shaman into something bigger. You can get some pretty busted cards with this. I think this would be fun to build around. Modern's just become so degenerate though that it's hard to even make cards like this work. However, with the haste ability with the Thunderkin Awakener and ways to even pump up toughness pretty decently, even in Standard right now, you can give it +0/+5 quite easily with a few different cards. You can get back a pretty huge elemental if you've Faithless Looting it away, or Burning Inquiry it away, or in Standard Tormenting Voice it away, and then attack in. And then the cool thing about this card is it doesn't exile, it just sacrifices the beginning of next end step, and you can rinse and repeat this as long as you can keep the Thunderkin Awakener alive. So if there's some really potent enter the battlefield effects or damage effects or whatnot, then this card definitely could see some play. We got the Vorse Claw 7/7 for 6, kind of filler card. We see these in one in every set. Tail's End, this card has been talked about quite a bit. It's a 2-mana Stifle effect. You counter target activated ability, triggered ability, or legendary spell. This might see some sideboard plays in Modern if we start to see a lot of blue-white mirrors, because activated abilities and triggered abilities and legendary spells are very, very potent in those decks. In Standard, again, this could easily be some sideboard-based tech depending on the meta. Stifle does see a lot of legacy play, so for what it's worth, it probably will see. I mean, it's countering fetch lands in Modern, so I think this one will be decently sought after. If this is a card that ends up having pre-sales for relatively cheap, I wouldn't fault you for going softly into this as a spec. All right, on to the next card, which is Brought Back. This card is very interesting, as Saffron Olive pointed out on Twitter. With fetch lands on turn number 2, you can basically get 2 of your fetch lands back. With Brought Back, you'll get it back at the end of your turn. And if anything else happens to die in a big turn, you can get a lot of things back. So choose up to 2 target permanent cards in your graveyard that were put there. Oh, so it is only 2. Put there this turn, and you return them to the battlefield tap. It's really fetch lands where this shines the most to ramp. However, I'm sure there's some other cards that have sacrifice abilities that you can, or even defensively with cards that have ETB effects, or looking at like the Cruel Celebrant decks where if your opponent actually does spend the resource to shock those off, then you can just bring them back and you got all the triggers. Very awkward card though in Standard. I don't know where it sees a home with Brought Back. Yeah, so again, it's going to make some fun decks. We'll see if it actually does work with fetch lands in Modern. On to the next card. This is Yarok's Wavecrasher, which is an elemental. Enters the battlefield, you return another creature you control to its owner's hand. This is basically a functional reprint of a green spell that existed from, I want to say, Origins, that does the exact same thing. So these have traditionally seen play in decks like Animar that want to have enter the battlefield effects happen again. You reduce the cost of it. I do play that specific one in Animar, so I'll probably play this one in it. So foils might actually hold some value. The common, or the regular version probably will not. All right, here's the Lightning Stormkin. Lightning Stormkin is just flying haste for 2 mana, but the key thing is this is both an elemental and a wizard. So we do have Wizard Tribal that does, right now, let me get the display on here correctly for this particular, there we go, let's readjust that. Didn't even notice it was off. We're prepared here. All right, so both of these are very relevant tribes. Elemental looks like it's pushed enough in Core 2020 to spawn at least a team or elemental deck, and Wizards definitely wants another flying haster, I think, for 2 mana. I think this is probably going to beat out some of the other ones that have possibly prowess triggers, or maybe even like Goblin Electromancer for that slot, because the 2/2 haster is exactly what they want to do by dishing off damage, and at least getting that 2 damage in, and then being able to be pumped with the Wizard Lord that whenever you cast a spell, the curve's pretty decent. You'll get in for probably 6 damage from hasters, and if they survive a turn, then it's probably lethal on the next turn. So a 1-drop, 2-drop, 3-drop, and then cast 2 spells is probably lethal, especially if it's like Wizards Lightnings. So I'm thinking Wizards is going to get a resurgence because of this card, just because of it's exactly what it's missing. If you've played Wizards, your opponent is usually down. Comparatively, if you're playing like Mono Red, Wizards is like a turn slower. I think this actually speeds it up back to where you can actually race like the Mono Red type decks. All right, let's go on back to the cards here. We have the Gorging Vulture. This is an interesting card. When it enters the battlefield, you put the top 4 cards of your library into your graveyard, and you gain 1 life for each creature card you put in your graveyard this way. Statistically speaking, that's going to be maybe 2, maybe 3 life. Hardly ever you're going to get 4, which is how many lands that mainly are played in decks. I don't think this is quite powerful enough for something like Modern Dredge because of the 3 mana. It's interesting for that amount of cards that get looted. Unfortunately, this is not a zombie. I think this would get more tempting if it was a zombie with Liliana. It actually would curve pretty well with the Core 2019 Liliana. However, again, I wouldn't count this card out because there have been cards like this particular one that mill 4 that have seen play before in Standard. So for that reason, keep an eye on the foils. I wouldn't touch the non-foils, of course, the common. The Brineborn Cutthroat, 2 mana for a 2/1. Flash, whenever you cast a spell during an opponent's turn, gets +1/+1 counter on it. Ops, this is a good way to make this a 3/2 with an opt easily, or start to use. I don't know if like the mono blue decks will actually want this. The Flash is actually quite interesting too, because these Flash work off each other. It is a merfolk too. And it can get quite big. So in tempo-based strategies where you're leaving up mana, and this also is the pirate, it could reduce the pirate counter spell unless they pay 4, which is they are already using another pirate. It could make pirates work. It'll be interesting enough to try this. So again, foils or bust with this particular card. I think this is a pretty interesting card, though, in Standard with the tempo-based strategy. We already have like a flash deck, Simic deck, that does run the another Merfolk in that particular strategy, the Simic one. They really pair off each other and then can start tempoing out. This can, if you can protect this, so slam this down, flash it in a turn, maybe throw a Curious Obsession on it, and then protect it from then on out, and it gets bigger and bigger and bigger as you protect it. It seems like a pretty legitimate line of play to take. Mystic Forge, this is another card that people have been talking about is pretty broken in like commander-based decks and could actually be pretty broken in Modern. This is a 4 mana. You can look at the top card of your library and cast the top card of your library if it's an artifact or a colorless non-land card. So speaking of like Tron, that is a way. And the thing about Tron is you can then cycle the top card of your library quite easily with many of your expedition maps or any of your other spells that go in Tutor. So if you happen to have a land card on top of your library, then you can just shuffle through your deck and hopefully get a non-land artifact or colorless card like an Ugin and cast it again. It does have that pay 1 life to exile a top card of your library. So don't count this out for Tron. It actually does seem like it's powerful enough for Tron. And then in the right decks in Standard, we still have Karn Ugin that are available. We have the Master Thopterus, we have Saheeli, and there are plenty of other artifacts that do have some cantripping effects right now. I would assume Mystic Forge would be playable. If we're looking at the Kaladesh Forward format or even Shadows over Innistrad format, we don't know. They haven't quite announced what it's going to be. Mystic Forge seems very, very powerful for that particular archetype. So if you think that, or format, so if you think that is going to translate to paper, I would not fault you for if the pre-sale price of this Mystic Forge is low enough to go in on this card quite substantially, because I think this is going to be one that's kind of is a sleeper at first, and then people get to play it and see just how broken this is. There also is some fun little interactions with being able to play additional lands per turn, or play land cards off the top of your library that then if you're playing basically all lands and artifacts, you can just really just machine gun through your deck. So again, this one should not be overlooked. I think it's one of the more powerful cards out of the set. We're going to skip Air Elemental and Overcome, and Undead Servant also is a reprint. We'll skip these commons for now. I will talk about the Battalion Foot Soldier. It's another way to have, it's the same one as the Vampire that exists right now, but in human form. So if we do find ways to reduce the cost of soldiers or reduce the cost of white spells, I think like an Oketra deck wouldn't be too shabby to throw 4 of these in. I always, when these type of effects are in Standard, I definitely try to build a deck around them. The Fairy Miscreant gets a reprint, which it did see play last time around in Origins. Mono Blue Temple, I don't know if it actually wants the Fairy Miscreant. Popper, of course, loves this card. We have another interesting card for Boros Aggro. This one is a flying 1/2 human knight, and when it attacks, you create a 1/1 white soldier creature token, tapped and attacking. What's interesting about this card is the flying. It is a 1/2, but it's going to basically have the power of 2, and yeah, that flying gives it evasiveness that you can keep attacking in and getting a white soldier creature token. I think maybe the Mardu Cruel Celebrant decks, you have another way to pump up these creatures through the 3 mana drop that gives all your creatures +1/+0, and when a non-token creature dies, dish off a damage. So that the non-token won't dish off a damage if you lose it, but at least it will get the pump. Heroic Intervention still exists. I think this is pretty neat as a card to add to the already pretty. We already have a lot of cards that can actually go in this. I don't know, maybe even Boros Heroic Intervention / the Hero Precinct 1 decks can just go down to 2 colors and make it work. Alrighty, so back to the Colossus Hammer. People have already talked about a possible turn 2 with this Colossal Hammer in Modern with Sigarda's Aid, and with the Core Duelist out of Zendikar. Core Duelist is a card with double strike, or when it's equipped, it gets double strike, so it's a 1-drop. You can give it double strike with the Sigarda's Aid coming down, then Colossus Hammer, which then equips it to the Duelist, and you swing in for 22 damage. Could happen, I guess. I mean, these type of cards are begging to be broken. We've seen a lot of these cards that had low equip costs, low casting cost and high equip costs be able to be cheated by other ways. +10/+10 is pretty significant. It does lose flying though, so you can't put it on evasive card. I think that's a pretty neat little addition there. They didn't want to make this like too broken, but I don't know. I think it's kind of a cheese card with that double strike. I'm sure people are going to make some meme decks with it. So you should definitely think of the foils of this particular card too. If you have like a weird foil EV or foil multiplier where this isn't very much higher than the non-foil, then I think that's the time to pick up, because I think these will be popular. There was a mono-white equip deck that was a pre-constructed deck. So, I mean, it is an archetype that gets played quite significantly in Commander. Got another equipment called the Ancestral Blade for 2 mana with a 1/1 white soldier creature token that attaches to it. So it's another one of those living weapon. All right, so the core Planeswalker decks were released. Nothing too significant out of them. They usually do have pretty weak cards in them, so we are just going to skip over the Planeswalker cards for this particular video. And same thing, these will be the starter kits that come out. We get another aggressive Mammoth. This card did hold some value. So if you do happen to have any aggressive Mammoths left over from the last time around, it's time to get rid of them before these next wave of cards do come in, because this definitely will saturate it. These are free decks that your local game store gets to just give out to people. All right, so let's go on to the Embodiment of Agonies. This is another card I've got a bunch of messages about the power level of Embodiment of Agonies. Flying Death Touch, 3 mana. When it enters the battlefield with it enters the battlefield with +1 counter on it for each different mana cost among non-land cards in your graveyard. So this one's pretty good if you have like 0 drops, 1 drop, 2 drops. It can enter the battlefield as a 3/3 on time with a Flying Death Touch for 3. But this does scale well as the game progresses. I just don't really think it's going to be that efficient. I mean, this card wants to be aggressive, but I mean, what's the best case scenario? A couple creatures have died. Maybe it comes in as a 2/2 on curve and slightly gets better. So I'm not a fan of this card. I think it's quite weak. It is something, though, that, again, late game, it can come in with something ridiculous. Say on like turn 7, you have a 6, a 5, a 4, a 3, and a 2. It comes in as a 5/5. If some way you get a 0 and a 1 and whatnot in there, the perfect little curve plus out of cards with this card, last card in your hand. Again, there's just too many things that have to be going for this card to make it actually. At this point in time, you can get like a 5/5 Death Toucher for 4 mana in Standard. It's not that big of a stretch now. All right, so we have the Cavalier of Gales. A lot of people are thinking this is the best one out of the run. 5 mana for a 5/5. Enters the battlefield, you draw 3 cards and put 2 cards from your hand on top of your library in any order. So it's got Brainstorm on a 5/5 flying creature for 5 mana. But when it dies, you shuffle it into your owner's library, then scry 2. So pretty potent card with a 5/5 flying for 5 that replaces itself. So think of Hydra Krasis, what you're doing. Even like let's just compare mana with Hydra Krasis. So if you were to spend a Hydra Krasis for 5 mana, you would get your but you only get 1 card because it rounds down, and you would get a 3/3 with flying. So this one you'd still get the best of a card out of 3 other cards. Actually, you put 2 cards from your hand, so it brainstorms. So you could get basically draw 3 cards and put 2 irrelevant cards back on top of your library. And it is a 5/5, so it's bigger than Hydra Krasis already. Hydra Krasis with 1 more mana ends up, getting 2 cards and 2 life, and then ends up being a 4/4. So yeah, I think the Cavalier of Gales is actually really, really potent. Where it gets, I know that the Hydra Krasis, why it's played a lot too, is that cast effect. Even if it counters, you at least get the draw and the life gain, and it also does have the upside of being very scalable. But I mean, Hydra Krasis really is 6 mana, 8 mana that's spent into it. I would say that you're getting the same bang for your buck with this particular card around that similar mana cost or even higher mana cost that's put into Hydra Krasis. So I am under the impression this is a very powerful card. It's also blinkable. It's something to be exploited. It doesn't shuffle your library when it gets blinked, however, but I mean, when you blink it, you're going to go through 3 cards over and over and over. Yeah, this is a very, very powerful card. We have Gargos the Vicious Watcher, which is the legendary Hydra. So this is probably another legendary creature that's going to spawn a lot of cards going up. As Hydra spells you cast cost 4 less to cast. Unfortunately, with this particular card, a lot of the Hydras are in red. so red-green. So it's going to limit the amount of Hydras that can go in the particular EDH deck, but it does reduce the spells by 4. Keep in mind, the Changelings are also reduced by this. I know there's a couple of Changeling cards with X in their mana cost that this does also reduce. And whenever creature you control becomes a target of a spell, so it doesn't have to be a target of the spell your opponent controls, a spell even you control, it gets to fight up to one creature you don't control. So it's 5 mana for an 8/7 Vigilance. Pretty potent in Stompies, so Stompies get back some replacement. They are losing a lot of very, very high-end cards, and Stompy hasn't been able to hit a tier deck just the way how Magic the Gathering works with the board wipes and a lot of, one-for-oneing. However, this one is kind of interesting. Even whenever a creature you control, it doesn't even have to be another creature. So then in some sort of like God's Willing heroic based strategy, this is a way you can kill off a lot of creatures, protect the Gargos Vicious Watcher. I don't know, it could spawn up some decks in Standard around those. I think that Standard really needs a card like Blossoming Defense though to put Stompy back on the map. All right, back to a couple days ago with the Blood-Soaked Altar. At a 6 mana, you pay 2 life, discard a card to create a 5/5 black demon creature. I think this one feels too weak for Standard, but it's going to be just a back-breaking card in Limited. So it's basically every turn your cards that you draw become a 5/5 black demon creature with the cost of 2 life. That's pretty backbreaking. Vivian Arkbow Ranger is the 4 mana, 1 a green and a green. You distribute counters among up to 2 target creatures. They can trample until a turn, and it also has the fight type ability, but it can get up to -5, which keep in mind is just 1 uptick. You may choose a creature card you own from outside the game, reveal it, and put it into your hand. Does not put it on the battlefield though, but in a toolbox-based strategy, this is quite powerful. Gets the card that you need. Combo-based decks might actually play this in Modern. I don't know, it feels a little bit of a stretch to go +1 and not get that big of a benefit. What is kind of nice with the Vivian Arkbow is you can distribute 2+1 counters among up to 2 target creatures, so Incubation Druids or anything else that gets the effect of getting +1 counters can then ramp up, and then if you use this as a tutor, that's quite interesting, and then go get a particular card that will get you out of a sticky situation. So yeah, might be a pretty decent addition to many decks for having this as a toolbox or a sideboard-based strategy. All right, so let's go over a few more of these. I think to right here to the lands is where I got to last time. You have to the Moat Piranhas. But Eternal Isolation is a 2 mana. You put target creature card with power 4 or greater on the bottom of the owner's library. This is actually pretty good with the way that Standard has been scaling. So think of the 5/4 for 3, for example. We have even bigger creatures that come out very quickly. Putting it back on its bottom of its owner library for 2 mana. Sorcery speed is quite awkward. Again, I don't know where this fits in Standard at the moment because we do have like Prison. We have Conclave Tribunal, which just seems a lot better than Eternal Isolation at the moment. However, this is something that can put those type of cards in check if they ever do get out of control. We have Kethis the Hidden Hand, which is the 3 mana Planeswalker in the Abzan colors. Legendary spells you cast cost 1 less to cast, and you can exile 2 legendary cards from your graveyard, and until turn each legendary card in your graveyard gains, you may play this card from your graveyard. So interesting card with, if you are in like a fully legendary deck. This is another one why I keep saying that Commander 2020 is just so Commander focused, is this one has probably, we're up to 5, 6, 7 commanders that are probably going to be very popular, and I think this is going to be one of them in a legendary type deck. Where this one actually gets pretty good is if you have any sort of utility cards that happen to be legendary. So think of even like legendary sorceries. They just have to be legendary cards, not legendary permanents, not legendary creatures, not legendary planeswalkers, just anything that has legendary on it, which is more and more sets, more utility cards have, going back to Azor's Gateway, there's one. It's a legendary card, isn't it? Yeah, Azor's Gateway is a legendary card. So cards like that can then be exiled that you don't need to cast back again, and then you can play all of your legendary cards from your graveyard. So pretty decent card. Has like a Muldrotha feel to it. Muldrotha is very, very popular. This one possibly could be extremely popular in Commander. So again, we're going to have to look at cards that actually do synergize around this card to see if it has legs to it, to see if it is going to spike up some value of those cards. We have Noxious Grass. Destroy a creature or planeswalker that's green or white. You gain 1 life. The Sephara Skyblade. You may pay a white and tap 4 untapped creature you control with flying rather than paying its mana cost for a 7/7 lifelinker, which then gives all your other flying creatures indestructible. So if you can get 2 of these out with like a spark double, Doesn't Spark Double make it lose legendary? I think it does. Then you can have the all your creatures have indestructible, including these ones, type claws. Mono white flying or white blue flying is actually pretty close to being there, so that's not a big of a stretch to even be running Spark Double in a deck like this. So anyway, the Moat Piranhas, which we saw before with the 3/3 Defender, and the Blood of Bones, which is the card that is able to sacrifice a creature, return a creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield, which is pretty potent with some of the bigger creatures in this format. And we have the Gain Life lands that were run. So I don't know if I got further than this, but this is where we'll stop today with cards. Core 2020 does seem to be a very packed full of at least the casual cards. So this set might be a dud right off the bat. Without that land run, which is going to get the standard players, buying and buying and buying and buying and buying. Yeah, this set might be able to accrue some value. So I don't know. I don't know if it's going to be heavily sold or not. The ley lines in it will definitely push some sales, because there is the initial wave of value, or EV. I mean, what Leyline of the Void and Leyline of Sanctity were very, very expensive before this reprinting. I don't know if that's comparable to like Crucible of Worlds and Omniscience, and yeah, probably is. Probably is, especially since these are rares. That's gonna be very attractive, I think, to be to be selling this set. But I think where this set definitely does shine is it does have a lot of extremely potent commander cards, and never underestimate that. That was Battle Bond in a nutshell. Battle Bond was kind of forgotten about because not modern playable. Yeah, there was had a lot of that initial sale, like the Brightling and. There's the Spellweave, I think is what it was the ones that were very highly sought after for Legacy. And then that sort of supply ran out. Both of those bottomed out, and then people forgot about Battle Bond. And then all of a sudden we have the guy that whenever you gain life, they lose life, or the demon. Whatever the demon, whenever opponent loses life, they lose double that life. I can't remember exactly what it does. It went from like a $3 card up to $20 or $12, and it was just because people forgot about Commander. This might be the same thing, and this thing is just chocked full of Commander cards that I think are going to be very playable. They're going to outclass existing ones and spawn a bunch of new play in Commander. So I like this set. I think it's going to be a good one to have a bunch of specs that will pay off, and those are the type of sets I like. So be looking forward to specific cards on the Rogue Market channel, or I'll probably do these for Market Mondays in the near future. So this has been Kevin with the Rogue Deck Builder. Again, I'll probably have a top 10 cards that are maybe a hit or miss type episode over at the Rogue Market here in a few days for the Market Monday recap. So go subscribe to that channel. And as always, thanks for watching.